Hello, my dear audiences. Welcome to the show. My name is Jack Chow. I'm on the East-West show with G&E TV, channel 44.9. As a matter of fact, you're watching it. That's why you can see me. Right. You have 44.9 already. Anyway. Okay. Anyway, just a joke. Nowadays, we're talking about American foreign policies, especially since the second term of President Barack Obama. His administration's foreign policies are getting lots of attentions. Sometimes the attention involves criticism about how we balance the relationship with the outer world, especially these days with problems coming from all directions. And it is really at stake how we take and how we evaluate or adjust our foreign policies. Today with me, getting into the very point, the very core of the issue is my good friend, long-standing friend, the Honorable James Lee, founder and CEO of the Lee Strategic Group. A strategy group. And also, what's more important is that he has a background more than you can look into. Back then, during Bush 41 time, he was on the Presidential Advisory Board, and later he became the spokesman of a former Governor Pete Wilson, and he now stays on the state level also, and he's active in the community too, and he's very much the person that I turn my crying baby to every time I'm confused, right? So,
well, hopefully you're not confused that much.
I am very confused. Okay. So to Mr. James Lee, very welcome to the show.
Always good to be here, Jack.
Sure. I owe you a little explanation why I get you here. It was about a week ago. There was a huge military parade in Moscow on Red Square. Mm-hmm. Was attended by 30 countries something, mm-hmm. at least with their leaders, if not their own parade troops or whatever. It was highly attended, highly commented, and it was the absence of the United States.
Well, it's the absence of a lot of countries in Western Europe, too.
Yeah, that caused a lot of attention because we are important, and they think we're important. Our absence makes more significance or raise more questions about it. So, how do you take about the Americans' absence?
First of all, the parade that you're talking about was the 70th anniversary commemoration of the end of World War II, mm-hmm. And it coincided with a lot of the events that are happening in Russia and the support they're giving to separatists in Ukraine. So the reason why the United States and most of the Western European leaders did not attend was because of Russia's continued aggression and support for what's happening in the Ukraine right now, and that really is the big stumbling block for a lot of countries, including President Obama. The fact of the matter is that the Russians have basically invaded Ukraine through their proxies, and not to mention the shooting down the Malaysian Airlines civilian commercial jetliner. So there are a lot of problems that are being exacerbated by the Russians' newfound kind of muscular attitude towards the West, including what President Putin is doing now with overflights in Alaskan airspace, overflights into Norwegian airspace, naval exercises, military training. A lot of the things that we saw in the Cold War that we haven't seen in the past 20 years, we're seeing again now, and that's very troubling for a lot of people. And especially with what happened in the Ukraine, all those countries that used to be NATO, that are now NATO countries, that used to be Warsaw Pact countries in the Soviet bloc, they're really worried now. Latvia, Estonia, Poland, these are all countries that are now concerned about a newly resurgent and militarized Russia.
Mm-hmm. And also, of course, it all depends on different takes, where you are and which angle you look at the
Well, if you live on the border and you're looking across Russia, you're worried.
Okay, anyway. Lots of people, according to their take, they take that as the parade itself, as a peace call rather than a muscle display.
I wouldn't agree with that at all.
Right.
I mean, you know, if the Russians are going to go ahead and hold a military parade and show off their hardware, at the same time they're supplying a lot of that hardware to the separatists in the Ukraine, and not to mention the Russians have just completed a sale where they're selling a top of the line anti-aircraft missile system to the Iranians during nuclear talks. It's a really troubling display of military
Especially
might.
when it has a huge banner in the commemoration of the end of this World War II, though. To lots of people, they might take as a interpretation of how what kind of attitude they take towards peace.
Well, I think you if you look at almost virtually every political analyst in Europe, what they view the Russians, especially President Putin, as wanting to rebuild the old Soviet Empire, which is why he's out there taking over the Ukraine, which is why he already took the Crimea, which is why he's engaging in these kind of proxy relationships with traditional adversaries to the West, like Iran, like North Korea, and so forth. So it's a very troubling pattern. It's a pattern that's starting to replicate what happened in the Cold War, and a lot of people don't want to see that happen again.
Okay. Let's assume if we Americans still hold on what our value is and still hold on to our positions, but strategically or technically, we're talking about assume that we did take part in it. So what negative impact, whatever, will bring us or bring the rest of the folks?
Well, I think the reason why you had a boycott, essentially, of those ceremonies was to send a clear, unmistakable message to President Putin that his conduct in the Ukraine and his conduct now in these different military gestures he's making are unacceptable. They're unacceptable in the world order that we have right now, and we don't want to backslide into another Cold War with the Russians. And the problem is that, you know, frankly, Russia right now is not a democracy. It's basically Putin's country. And the problem is that we're trying to deal now with a guy who's a former KGB agent who has who has pretty much, you know, total control over the economy and the government, and frankly, he's doing whatever he wants.
Okay. Talking about the Cold War, though, if the continuation goes on and on and on with the sanctions, with the boycott and everything, are we going back to the Cold War time?
Well, we're starting to slip that way. I mean, the fact that we've already placed sanctions on Russia because of what happened in the Ukraine, the fact that Western Europe and a lot of the old Warsaw Pact countries are now upping their military expenditures for the first time in 10 years, are all very troubling signs. And they indicate that if we don't alter this course, if we don't alter this path, if we can't persuade Vladimir Putin to change his attitude, then we are going to go back into that kind of situation.
How about countries for European community? Are they on our side?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's very, very clear. I mean, you know, the United Kingdom, France, Spain, Italy, all these countries boycotted. The only Western leader that went was Angela Merkel of Germany, and that's largely because she's taken the point position as the lead negotiator for Western Europe with Russia on the Ukraine, and she has a relationship with Vladimir Putin. Unfortunately, we haven't seen that relationship turn into any concrete action yet, which is why a lot of people are nervous.
What do the NATO countries do? There are 28 or 29 members.
Well, I think what all the NATO countries are doing right now is what you just saw this week, and that is that they've stepped up military coordination, they've stepped up exercises. You've had really a NATO naval exercise over in Norway right now involving all the Scandinavian countries because of the Russians moving naval assets out there, including shadowing submarines. You've seen more NATO overflights now, especially the British, because they're concerned over recent intrusions by Russian bombers into their airspace. You've seen the United States commit additional troops. We saw a combat armored brigade participate in the NATO exercises. So all these things have now kind of elevated themselves to a point where NATO has forced itself to go ahead and start kind of showing its own muscle back to the Russians.
In other words, the tendencies of going back in Cold War time tends to be stronger than we could see before.
Well, the problem is that, you know, we're kind of back into the cycle of the Cold War in that we are trying to interpret each other's motives and actions by things that are happening. There's no more direct dialogue anymore. I mean, when the Russians send a Russian bomber into British airspace, if they send a bomber into Alaskan airspace, if they send a Russian submarine into Norwegian waters, what are we supposed to make of that? You know, if they sell missiles to the Iranians, what are we supposed to make of that?
The message were taken.
And that's the problem right now, is that we're having to read Vladimir Putin's mind by what he's doing.
I see.
Because he's not telling us.
Okay, very good. My dear audience, today we're talking about U.S. foreign policies. We need somebody who understands the whole thing, who knows what he's talking about, and who has a rich background of knowing U.S. policies to talk about it, to share his views with us. And lots of people worry about where the United States stand. Are we still number one? Are we playing as we number one? Or do we have the assets to keep on playing as number one? Those are the questions that remain to be answered. With me today, my good friend and famous political analyst, the Honorable Mr. James Lee. So let's take a short moment out. When we come back, we'll continue finding the U.S. relations with China. So that also is another issue, another big area to talk about. Stay with us, please.